Hello, and welcome to this episode of Stephanie's Supply Chain Sit Downs. This episode is a sit down with Mr. Tom Maher, who has over 30 years of supply chain experience and is a former senior vice president of global service parts for Dell. Here is our sit down. So, I was wondering, what supply chain roles have you held, and then do you have a favorite one that you've worked with?
Okay. So I've been in supply chain for 31 years. And now let me think through in order. What roles did I hold? I started with a project in New Jersey on excess and obsolescence. So it was working in a warehouse, right? Boxes coming in, opening them up, dividing them up by commodity, and getting them into the receiving process. So physical manual labor was my first, what I would argue, first supply chain job. Then I ran a data entry center. So that was a combination of categorizing products coming in. They could be coming in for or for a repair, or just a return. And so you'd have some people focused on the categorization. We had people, it wasn't quite as automated. You're just entering into a computer that this one now needs to go to the repair center, or this one can go back direct to stock, et cetera, but doing the dispositioning and recording the receipt of the product. And then I've run repair centers, notebook repair centers, tablets, more of the portable products, cell phones, and doing that for a combination of consumers, but predominantly for commercial customers, large corporations that would have a need to replenish. So we actually had one of the very first ever advanced exchange programs. So what we would do for our customers, and I ran this operation, was repairing their notebooks and putting them on a shelf. So their sales force could be anywhere in the world. And when they needed a unit because theirs broke, we would ship the good one immediately so they'd have it the next day, well, depending on where they were. And they would return the old one, would fix it and put it back in their stock. I've run entire warehouses, so pick, pack, ship operations, inventory management and control, vendor management, where we outsourced and being responsible for the various vendors, demand planning. So that's the decision on what quantity of parts you need in what location across the globe. I've run procurement, which is the strategic procurement as well as the transactional based buyers, all sorts of different operational management teams, strategy of supply chain. I said the repair centers, fraud. I've run a fraud management organization. Anytime you have warranty-based or insurance-based programs, there's a risk of fraud. All right, so I've run that. Now, what would be my favorite? I exited where the last, 15, 20 years, I was running all of that, right? So the global supply chain, aftermarket supply chain for Dell Technologies. What would I have? I think I always enjoyed the most running the physical operation. So be it a repair center or a fulfillment center, it's probably the thing that I did best outside of crisis management. That's kind of where I got my, where most people would say I would excel at. But I enjoy the actual running the operation, the direct management of the people, more so than I think, some of the more tactical parts of the business. It's nice running a large operation, owning the four walls.
That makes sense. And then I had just had a quick question about your experience as well. It sounds like you've had experience doing everything from planning and procurement to operations. Do you have like a favorite section of supply chain that you've worked in as well?
Yeah, I think it's the operations because that's the people who are touching the product, repairing the product, picking and packing and shipping. And there's automation in there, there's robotics and different things. But it's still the ground roots of where supply chain started, right? Physically getting product moving. And there's nothing like, walking up and down the lines. All right, the truck's coming at 8 p.m. We got to load it. What are we missing? Shifting people around, moving repairs. This one's an expedite. Somebody who knows Michael called. No, I'm kidding. But move it to the front and get it fixed. And that the chaos of getting everything out on the deadline for that day. I think it's probably the most exciting and the most fun. Now, I will say, right, the demand planning is the most complex. It is, you get a lot of fun dealing into the machine learning, the different algorithms, and trying to get that right number because everything is predicated on that. If you do that well, then everything else flows without, there's always going to be exceptions, but much smoother. So I could sit there for hours and have conversations on the theories of how to demand plan, different environments, different tools, different algorithms. And I enjoy that. But I think the thing is the most fun is when you're walking up and down the lines towards the end of the day, and you got to get the repaired product out or the your pick, pack, ship, fulfillment operations, get all the product out the door.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess so. Obviously, you have a lot of experience in supply chain, and there's been a lot of, I guess, not to put it lightly, crazy things that have gone on in the last 5 years with COVID, and then like the Russia-Ukraine crisis, or war that's going on there. What has been like an unexpected issue, whether that's one of those two events or something else that happened during your time in like one of your roles, and how did you work to overcome it?
Yeah. The one thing I tell people about if they're thinking about getting into supply chain is it is incredibly dynamic. You cannot plan for everything. There is disruption you purposely put into the supply chain, changing suppliers, launching a new solution, a new process, which you have to manage, but they're scheduled and controllable. They don't always all go well. Putting in a new ERP or any software system, has its own challenges. The unexpected is what makes supply chain exciting. So if you think about COVID changed everything we know about supply chain. The boat getting stuck in the Suez Canal, nobody planned for that. China tariffs, massive impact to the supply chain. Ransomware attacks on partners, huge unplanned issues, things you can do to mitigate. But I think just sharing a few of the examples. China tariffs, right? People think, okay, well now you got to pay more for getting some parts into the country, but it's actually a disruption that generates an opportunity. Parts that we used to purchase because it was better or cheaper, less expensive to purchase them than to repair them. We had to revisit all those algorithms, right? Well, guess what? Now that you're going to add a 20-25% tariff, maybe it is less expensive to repair. So it increased the volume of components we repaired dramatically. It changed our physical supply chain because the tariffs only apply to imports into the US, and we do a lot of product, obviously in the US, but also across the globe. Working with alternative suppliers, so it's not coming out of China. Those were all things we had to go do. We had to implement brand new programs for duty relief on the tariff, right? If you do bring it into the US, but you export it, right, into say Peru, or you can do a duty drawback on that, and had to implement all those new programs, all because of the China tariff. There are places, for example, that would have been fulfilled the replenishment activities out of the US that companies had to shift and say, okay, they may still replenish it out of the US if they didn't solve how to go direct, but you don't want it coming back to the US, right, as that regional hub. So you saw across multiple industries, repair operations grow in countries where maybe you would not normally grow. For Canada, for example, where it would not have been cost effective to grow, now became cost effective. Then you had countries that based on volume and size, say a Panama or a Costa Rica, may not have been cost effective because of the volume, now became cost effective. So it changed how people or companies made decisions on how to disposition product, where to repair it, where to export it for final disposition if it's excess and obsolescence, and that kind of stuff. Just totally unplanned. I mean, you could see it was coming, but it's not something you would have built in your 3 to 5 year supply chain strategy.
That
Does that
makes
make sense?
Yes, it does. And then I was wondering, just to hear your thoughts, what do you think the next big supply chain disruption could be like in the next couple of years?
Yeah, great question. So there's always the environmental issues. And do I think there's another pandemic coming? Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that as much. Those things could happen, and we know how to deal with them now. I think it's more going to be the global politics, macroeconomics. So some things such as the relationship between the U.S. and China, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence products. So what products you have to put in programs now that there's certain types of components we can't ship into certain countries, right? And being able to control that. There's going to be, I'd like to think there's going to be better global cooperation. But when you look at what's happening in the Ukraine and some of the tariff debates between countries like the U.S. and China, and there's many others, by the way, that are putting up what I would argue are barriers to importations. So all of that, I think, will continue to be a challenge. But I think the disruptions we're going to see are going to be more positive than negative. I think artificial intelligence will drive a significant disruption into the supply chains in a positive way. The ability of there's great demand planning tools, for example, that are out there. But there are startups that are going to be AI native that are going to blow them all out of the water. And the machine learning capability, the supply chain visibility, IoT, the ability to connect partners and products better than ever before, and leveraging artificial intelligence on top of that is going to make the supply chains more predictable, easier to manage, and that will take out a significant amount of cost. Right. So I think that is going to be a very positive disruption. I do think there's going to be trade barriers that will continue to pop up, and we have to react to them, one country at a time, and that's a challenge. The other one that I would throw out there, and it's already in its early days, so it's out there, but I'm not sure everybody's truly comprehended it. But in my industry, right, computer technology, the right to repair is a massive disruptor. And it's consumer based, but there's obviously a lot of consumer based computers out there. Having to extend warranties, or I shouldn't say warranties, but the ability to repair and support a product beyond what an engineer may say is its useful life because of legislation that individual countries are passing, or in our case, in the US, individual states, is going to make things incredibly complicated. Being an optimist, I think the European Union will come to a collective set of rules, and I think the United States will get some level of federal guidance. But can you imagine, with right to repair, having to have parts available, the technology to repair it available, all the BIOS updates, anything that a customer can download, drivers, etc., that are going to be expanded to 7+ years on a consumer-based product, all the repair manuals, everything, so that they can do it yourself. Right to repair is essentially allowing the consumer, if they so choose, to have everything at their disposal to ensure they can perform a repair in that product, which a lot of companies, I'm not saying they're against it or for it, it's just preparing for that. And if California has different rules than New York, and the US has different rules than Mexico, and all the European Union, every country has different rules, makes it incredibly complex when a customer contacts a computer manufacturer and knowing, okay, this is Italy, here's my obligations, versus if it was France calling, is going to make things incredibly complicated.
That makes sense. Yeah. I feel like those disruptors that you mentioned will, like machine learning, that'll make supply chain a lot more resilient, which is going to be really exciting to see as well.
I think so.
Yeah. And I was wondering, how do you think people can best prepare themselves for like machine learning, AI, and any other like future disruptions that could come in like the next couple of years?
Yeah, there was a great quote, I'm going to screw this up, from Heather Dolman at the Arizona State University Women in Supply Chain Symposium last week. And she said, I'm going to screw this up, but essentially, AI is not going to replace people. People who know how to use AI will replace people who do not know. So I think preparing, and clearly the technology is changing very quickly. But having that understanding as a student early into the workforce and struggling but necessary for those like myself who are a bit up there in age. If you don't understand these technologies, at least at our level where you can determine where they're useful, where they're not, ask the right questions, and be building your workforce so that they're increasing their skill set so that they can use it, you won't be part of the future. This is I heard a great example from a colleague who said he used to work at a grocery chain and was an accountant in charge of inventory. He said every day they'd be out there with clipboards, a printout, and a pencil, and they'd be doing inventory. Said Excel changed their life. It changed the industry. And it's had a great long run. And I'm not saying Excel's going away, but it was the single greatest process improvement. What's the word I'm looking for? Semi-automation, but made everything easier and quicker. AI is going to do that. That's going to be the next great process improvement tool that we all have. Everybody, it's going to come up with better answers in many cases, and that will be impactful. But it's going to automate so many things that we haven't even thought of yet. Little things like your meetings, you're on a Zoom call right now. If you've got the transcript, you can place that Zoom call transcript into a tool like ChatGPT and say, summarize the meeting notes. And what would have taken somebody, 20 minutes, an hour, will be done in seconds and very, very accurately. Right. So it's going to do all this level of automation to get rid of non-value add work that I think will blow everybody away. It's going to have other much bigger benefits, right, with demand planning or things of that nature. So making sure the school's curriculum is embracing this. The professors are embracing it. The students will. There's no doubt there. But you've got to have inside of every company, we're all software companies now, right? Everybody's got they're a digital company. And you don't want to be on the wrong side of the digital divide. You've got to be constantly educating your workforce. And that's, everything from somebody working in a warehouse to somebody doing, high-end demand planning. All of those people are going to have to understand this technology if they want to have a role in the future. I still remember the days, well, yeah, I hear about Excel, but it doesn't affect me. Well, 30 years later, we're still using an Excel, and everybody in almost every job uses it in one way, shape, or form. AI is going to be the same.
That makes sense. Yeah. And then I had a question kind of going off of that as well. Do you think data analytics will also become a huge role in supply chain as well? Because I've heard in some of my classes that data analytics and supply chain are starting to become more intertwined.
Yeah, I'd say it already is. It's already a huge role. And by the way, when you're into like the data science world, the pay is significantly better, right? So students who can do that, I think it's great. You have a data science degree and a supply chain background. If you can, and I know some universities will pair those up. I think it makes a very powerful combination. We're seeing this. Give you an example in my own world running global supply chains. You go back 7, 8 years ago, we didn't have any data scientists. We didn't have any PhDs. Now we have an entire teams of data scientists, and in the high end, several PhDs. And so it is, I would argue, already significantly impacting the supply chains. You have large corporations that have been doing this for many years that are trying to adjust their tools, enhance them with the AI, which is hard, right? So you take something that is a robust industry standard tool that doesn't use AI, and now you're doing add-ons to it, which the data science teams are all having to figure out how to use, while at the same time, the software companies are trying to change their core engine. Right. So one of the ways, maybe not a very good way, but analogy is, the combustion engine trying to change it to an electric engine, right? A traditional vehicle to a Tesla, for example. Now it's easy to say, I don't have any combustion engines. I don't have to worry about them. I'm starting fresh. I'm native EV. I'm Tesla. That's actually significantly easier. Now, the car companies are doing a little bit of both, but you can't change the engine, you have to replace it. Most software companies that are industry standards and supply chain tools are trying to replace the engine or trying to change the engine. Now, some of them may have in the back room, they're developing their own new, brand new from the ground up AI planning tools, procurement tools, network optimization tools, while trying to keep their existing tools functional and usable by their customers. It is going to be an interesting battle. It's like the cloud native companies versus the companies that are trying to shift to the cloud. Very different challenges in those two. So I think you're going to see these data scientists trying to help the more established companies stay afloat and bring in the new technologies, but you're going to see a ton of them building the future supply chain tools with native AI companies and trying to disrupt and compete with the more traditional players. And they're all going to make a lot of money. If you're a student today, if you're in data science, you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And then I guess I have just one last question for you. So part of why I'm making this podcast and all that is to try to also ask for advice for like either students who are entering supply chain like in college or people who are going to start working in supply chain and like a professional career in the next couple of years. I was wondering, what advice do you have for succeeding in supply chain?
Yeah, yes. Some things I'll say supply chain specific, but there's other things that could go across any industry you choose to get into, any type of job. But with supply chain, I really think people have to have a combination of macro knowledge. You have to, if people who are very, very successful understand the bigger picture, they don't have to be experts in every portion of the supply chain, from sourcing product to assembling product to putting it on containers, ocean freight, air freight, ground freight, LTL, FTL. They don't have to be experts in everything, but they have to understand the actual supply chain from beginning to end, cradle to grave. Because the most of the problems occur in a supply chain are when they're dropped between the handoffs. So understanding your downstream and your upstream impacts of whatever your job you're doing, I think is critical. And you don't have to be an expert in what everybody else is doing, but you need to know how your function impacts them. That's one thing. Second, you've got to be, it's dynamic. You can't expect perfection. There are issues. You cannot plan for a boat getting stuck sideways in the Suez Canal, right? So you've got to be one of those problem solving type thinkers. Those are the people that really excel in supply chain. They solve problems. That's what we do on a day-to-day basis. Don't be afraid of the technology. Embrace it. And by the way, 3 years from now, there's going to be technologies coming in that were created by technologies that just began 3 years ago, and they're going to be changing so rapidly. It's just going to become part of our daily life, understanding them. But don't chase every single new shiny object. You have to establish a supply chain. Finish the project. I see a lot of companies and people get stuck because, oh man, we got to do blockchain now, or we have to do ML. Well, finish what you're doing and then make a very strategic decision on what technologies you will invest on in next, and then go forward. You can end up being in the weeds all the time because it's constantly changing, and technology breeds better technology. It's not going to stop. So having that balance, I think, is critical. But the things, and I told the students last week in the networking after the Women in Supply Chain, there's a few things you all have to do. Whatever job you get, if you choose in supply chain to work in a warehouse, work in a repair center, manufacturing, logistics, planning, procurement, doesn't matter. Do it well. Understand the bigger picture, but do your job well. Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the grass is always greener. If you don't do your job well, nothing else matters. Your career's got a problem. So do that. Second, when opportunities arise, projects, meetings, conversations, new jobs, Don't be afraid to take on a new experience. You learn more from a good or bad experience than reading a book. You know, the analogy I always give is you can read every book ever written on how to swim. Michael Phelps can be your personal swim instructor. Until you go in the water, you will not learn how to swim. So enjoying and trying those different experiences really, really help grow your career. You may not always know it at a given time. Do you want to be just continue to grow in a certain discipline? Do you want to go back and get an MBA? Do you want to be a general manager one day? And that will kind of guide things. You may not always know at any point in your career exactly what you want to do next. So I honestly can't remember a time I said no. I didn't always want to say yes, but I never said no. And so I think that gives you the opportunity to take, you know, your learnings, add a new experience, and you begin to gain wisdom. And the last thing I say is be accountable, especially when you're getting in big companies, and avoid the finger pointing game. Own it, run with it. If you make a mistake, own it, explain how you're going to go fix it. So much time is wasted with people worrying about who screwed up, you know, how to cover themselves, that kind of stuff. Don't just do your job as well as you can. We're all going to make mistakes. Own it. Own your numbers. Own your results. Be accountable for it, and you will grow from that. The last thing I'll say, and this is a slightly different view, but people get confused when you say leadership. Is leadership can happen at any stage in your career, even as a student. Be a peer leader. That it's end of the day, your boss will know how you're performing. That's their job. All the other people who are at that more senior level who may be voting on your next job, your promotion, your merit, what have you, they're not going to know you exceptionally well in most cases. They're going to be asking their people, what is it like to work with Tom? Right. And I tell people all the time, they're coming and say, you know, what do I have to do to get, you know, that next career advancement? How do I get that job over there? And I tell them, impress the hell out of your peers. They're the ones who are going to be talking about you. When you're in a meeting and somebody screws up, you know, take them aside afterwards and say, here's how I would have handled that. I'm not saying I'm right, but here's just another way to think of that problem or how I would do it differently. You know, and you can do that with an internship, with other interns, with classmates who are struggling. Don't just sit there and watch people having a problem. Help them out. That's being a leader, and everybody will recognize it. And in the meetings, whenever all your peers start looking at you, everybody else notices that as well. So you can lead at any point throughout your career. And not everybody wants to be a leader, and you don't have to be, right? There's people who want to be the greatest engineer known to mankind. That's wonderful, right? If you know that's what you want, then you can gear your careers towards that. But to me, those are the things that it doesn't matter what industry you get in. Certainly they apply to supply chain, but regardless of what you do in your careers, those will always be beneficial. And as Michael Dell says, win, but be nice, right? There's nothing wrong with being professional, cordial, right? As you go throughout your career. End of the day, you've got to, you know, bring in results, and winning, by the way, is a lot of fun, right? So I'd rather win than lose, but you've got to be able to be professional and treat people with respect, regardless of what level you are in the operation. Those would be my, you know, what I would call words of wisdom. Others may just call obvious.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much for that advice. That's a lot of really good information and good information just to have. Yeah. And thank you so much for taking your time to meet with me about this and for answering all of my questions. I really enjoyed speaking with you and hearing your insights on where supply chain's going, machine learning and AI, and then obviously all of the advice that you just gave as well. So thank you so much for taking time to meet with me. Thank you again to Mr. Maher for sitting down with me and discussing how COVID and other disruptions have impacted the supply chain industry, what future supply chain disruptions could be, and what the future of AI and machine learning could look like in supply chain and supply chain systems. For more episodes and sit downs, you can visit my podcast page, Stephanie's Supply Chain Sit Downs on Spotify. Thanks for listening and see you in the next episode.